Well, good morning again. Week 5. You may wonder why we skipped the rest of the patriarchal period, but I just got really interested in looking at a couple people we don't normally really pay much attention to. Miriam and Aaron. Life is difficult when your baby brother is Moses, Prince of Egypt. Uh, he's always seemed to be in the middle of trouble. I mean, he's born in the middle of trouble. Right after the command is given out, at the end of Exodus 1, every son that's born to the Hebrews you cast into the Nile to let every daughter live. Here comes Moses, born to a man from the house of Levi and his wife, a Levite woman. We're not actually given their names here. You have to keep reading onward to one of the genealogies to find that the man's name is Amram and the woman's name is Jochebed. But here's this child. The ruling is, if it's a boy, throw him in the Nile. And they try to hide him. They hide him for a little while, and they couldn't hide him any longer. So, according to the letter of the law, not the spirit of it, they put him in the Nile in a basket made of waterproofed bulrushes. And then we have this curious little phrase, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now, we're not given her name at this point. Again, you have to read a little further forward to look at the genealogies to find that there's only one daughter listed born to this couple, Miriam. And we're not told how old she is, but she is definitely the firstborn. She's the oldest of the three. It was thought that at this time she was about 6 or 7. But what we do know about her is that she is, even as a young child, quite bold, because she, a Hebrew slave girl, speaks to Pharaoh's daughter and proposes, so she's also resourceful, to go and call a nurse from the Hebrew women to bring the child up. So already we have this older sister trying to keep her youngest brother out of trouble. But both of them sort of disappear behind Moses' story for quite a long time. We don't see Miriam again, in fact, until, interesting, we first see her by the Nile, and then we see her by the Red Sea. After the water has closed over the Egyptians and Moses has led the people of Israel in a song, then we find Miriam, and here we get more description of her, the prophetess. So that's interesting. She was known for speaking the word of the Lord. She's also known as the sister of Aaron. I can't help but think that's because Moses was gone for so long that people stopped associating his siblings with him. And she goes out with a tambourine in hand, and the women after her. It's supposed to have been a really spectacular dance scene. They're singing and dancing the first line of the song Moses is taught. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. So she's still a leader, still very bold, known as a prophetess. Interesting. And then she disappears again for many years. But there are 3 siblings here. We've looked at the eldest, that's Miriam. And then we have the middle child, firstborn son, Aaron. How do we know he is the middle child? Well, because when you get to Exodus 7, we're actually told how old he and Moses are. Exodus 7:7, easy to remember. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. So at the time when Miriam is watching over the baby by the Nile, Aaron was 3 years old. Probably still home with his mother, born before the decree to throw the boys into the Nile. But we don't hear about him at all until the incident with the burning bush. Now, you talk about a youngest brother who's always in trouble. He's born in trouble. When he's grown up, he kills a man, flees from the authorities. He's gone for years, not a word from him. While he's gone, he's setting up a new life for himself out in the wilderness. And of course, he sees a flame inside a bush, which, in the desert, I expect seeing something on fire was not, odd. But this bush is burning, but not being consumed by the fire. That is odd because the very nature of fire is to consume fuel. So there's something about this fire that is self-sustaining. It needs no tangible fuel. So he goes to look to see this great sight, why the bush is not burning up. Then he meets the Lord. And he's given a task. And he makes excuses. Right? We go through this story quite often compared to a lot of the other stories of the Old Testament where God says, go and speak to my people. And they're like, and Moses is all, well, what if I say to them, he spoke to me? And they say, well, who do you say? What's his name? What do I say to him? So he's asking all these questions. What do I say? What do I say? What if they don't believe me? So he gives him some signs. Here's the staff. Throw it down. Becomes a serpent. And he runs. The Lord says, nope, go back. Catch it by the tail. It's your staff again. So he gives him these signs. And then Moses is like, oh, but I'm not eloquent. And here's where Aaron comes up. I am slow of speech and of tongue. The Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Who made him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. Moses said, oh, my Lord, please send someone else. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know he can speak well. Which, if you think about this for a moment, which one of them had had the full royal education in Pharaoh's palace, right? Moses did. Aaron, a Levite, would have probably just been a laborer. And yet, I know your brother Aaron can speak well. And behold, he is coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. So Aaron becomes a sort of compromise that God makes with Moses's fear, his lack of confidence, which begins a long series of almost like playing telephone between Moses and Pharaoh. Where Moses speaks to Aaron, and then Aaron speaks to Pharaoh. Moses gives a command. Aaron does the sign. So quite often, as you go through Exodus, you will find the names paired, Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron. But after a while, it's like Aaron just sort of disappears behind Moses. Oh, by the way, when we first see Aaron is at the end of chapter 4 of Exodus. The Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." So he went and met him. So the Lord had spoken to Aaron, and since Miriam isn't called a prophetess, it's to be supposed that the Lord has spoken to her too. It's an interesting family, if you think about that. Or you could have 3 children in the same family that the Lord is known to speak to. And so Moses and Aaron, they go and they gather together the elders of the peoples of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. But this is where the trouble starts. They have to go back and forth and back and forth. And Moses says to Aaron, God says this. So Aaron says to Pharaoh, God said this. Throughout all of the plagues that the Lord brings on Egypt, it's curious to me that Aaron may be the mouth and the hands in a way, but every time a plague is to be removed, it's Moses who cries out to the Lord on behalf of Egypt to have the plague removed. Aaron also has another unique, say unique experience, but there were 74 people who had this unique experience together. If you go to chapter 24 of Exodus, after they've left Egypt, they've gone out. There is a time when the Lord says to Moses, "Come up, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's 2 oldest, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him." So Moses went and told people all the words of the Lord and all the rules. He says all the rules. This is the first part of the law being given. The Decalogue, laws of restitution, how to deal with slaves, conquest, Sabbath, the first part, right, of the law. He's going to go up again to get the directions for the Ark of the Covenant and the sanctuary to go around it and all that sort of thing. But in the midst of this, they hold a confirmation of the covenant. And you get to verse 9, Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. Now, a lot of people are kind of confused about this because obviously the rule is you will not behold God with your own eyes or you die. So it's sometimes thought that that description of the pavement of sapphire stone, like underneath the throne, was as much as they saw. Enough to know very clearly that the Lord was almost tangibly present there, but still not a full seeing. But they go up and they eat and they drink in the presence of the Lord. You would think that this would have been a milestone moment, a pivotal moment for all of these 74 people. But what happens immediately after? The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction." So Moses rose with his assistant Joshua. Moses went up into the mountain of God. He said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we return to you." And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you, and whoever has a dispute, let him go to them. So he goes up on the mountain, the cloud covers the mountain, and the glory of the Lord dwells on Mount Sinai 6 days. And on the seventh, he calls to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the description is, I kind of wish I could see it, to be honest. This is the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. And Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. He was there for 40 days and 40 nights. So basically, this is one of those situations where you could say to Aaron, you had one job. You had one job to do while Moses is up receiving the rest of the covenant and the description of how everything is to be made. And this really, until I started looking into this more deeply, had never really struck me, but he's receiving the instructions for Aaron's high priesthood and how they are to dress, how they are to behave, who they are to marry, all this sort of stuff. And in the midst of this, while Moses is up on the mountain receiving Aaron's high priesthood instructions, among other things, we hit chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Again, Aaron, you had one job, and that was to keep things in order until Moses got back. And so this man who has been set apart for high priesthood that is to go through his descendants all the way down until the new covenant, says to the people, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And so they did. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden graven calf. That's important to remember that description right there. He received the gold from their hand and fashioned it, right? Because that's not the story he tells later. And when the people saw it, they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Curious point, they say gods plural, but there's only one calf. So some people think that they are talking about, like, this is the representative that, they're also going to worship the Lord. But here also now you have something to go on before you, something tangible, something not scary, something that you can take in hand and know where you are with it. And as support for this, they point out what Aaron says afterwards. He builds an altar before the calf and made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." As if you have both of them together, that, this is like a partnership of some kind. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Now, Paul mentions this in 1 Corinthians 10 as an example. Not a good example. But as a warning against dabbling in the idolatry of the pagan world. That, their forefathers, the generation of the Exodus, were all under the cloud, passed through the sea, etc., etc., etc. And yet, nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased. And now these things took place as examples for us that we might not desire evil as they did. And verse 7 is, of course, the reference to what we just read. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And also, it is thought that when they say rose up to play, there was some sexual immorality involved. So while this is happening down below, the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. Hence your people, not my people. And the Lord said to Moses, I've seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. Not the first time he's taken one person, fairly old in physical age, and made a great nation of him, right? It's almost like he's saying, let's reset this to the point where we were with Abraham. But Moses intercedes. And he appeals to the name of the Lord, his renown in front of the nations, his promise to the patriarchs, and his intercession is effective. But that doesn't mean that he himself is not absolutely furious. He goes down, and when Joshua, his assistant, hears the noise, he thinks that they've been attacked, that there's war going on. But Moses said, it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. So he's got work to do. And part of that work is getting an accounting from Aaron. And his question, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? All right, now it's not nice to be getting your comeuppance from your younger brother, the baby of the family. But Aaron's not exactly straightforward. He makes some really implausible excuses. Not only has he compromised the people, as if, you can make an idol and then have a feast of the Lord, to have things both ways. But now he's making some of the lamest excuses I've ever seen. His first is, you know the people, that they are set on evil. They said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. Right? First off, the whole point of leaving you there, Aaron, was to rein in this people who are set on evil. They'd already received the first half of the law. It wasn't like they didn't know how they were to worship the Lord. But they had gotten restless, waiting and not knowing what was going on. And Aaron then, of course, not only puts the blame on the people for being set on evil, but he tells the worst story ever about this calf. They gave the gold to me and I threw it into the fire and out came this calf. Like, what? This is a miracle? No. We already saw that you took the gold and you fashioned it. You made this graven image. I like verse 25. not because it's enjoyable per se, but because it really lays things out the way they are. When Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose to the derision of their enemies. This is not just an offense against God, though that is the chief part of it. But now they have, in front of all their enemies, disgraced themselves as the people of God. And Aaron was the one who led them. He had one job. It was a really important job, and he did not carry it out. And so what happens? He calls for their relatives. Basically, he just stands in the gate of the camp and says, "Who's on the Lord's side? Come to me." And the sons of Levi gathered around him. That's his tribe, right? And they are sent out to put to death those who participated in the idolatry. It says about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. And then, as if that weren't enough, the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. This just keeps following. It's like, Aaron, the story, nobody believes the story you told. And Moses keeps having to intercede. And he keeps getting challenged. You think how many times people come up and try to take for themselves the role that was set apart for Aaron and his sons, even his sons. If you look at the book of Numbers, there are protests, there are incidents. Like, who is to be the representative of Israel before God? But the most painful one of this must have been the one that happens in Numbers chapter 12. All this time, you would suppose Moses has been able to rely on his siblings. God has sent them to him in ways that, to make up for his weaknesses, to shore up his fears. And yet they too speak against him. Numbers chapter 12 is entirely about Miriam and Aaron opposing Moses. Now they speak against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" So here's the problem. They're starting to talk about Moses as if, right, to be honest, he's not all that. In fact, he married a woman from outside of the people of Israel. And aren't we also a prophetess and a high priest? Honestly, aren't we his equals? Or you can almost hear his superiors, because we're older than he is. And we don't know if Miriam actually ever married. We're not told that she did. But we know that Aaron was married, and he married someone within the Levite. I mean, but there's this Moses, this troublemaker, one who has kept going off the rails in his youth, and now he's got this Cushite wife and all these half Israelite, half Cushite children. So, but the Lord hears. And there are a lot of people who say that verse 3, the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who are on the face of the earth. is an indicator that the Pentateuch, the 5 first books of the Bible, could not have been written by Moses. What kind of meek man writes, he was very meek? I actually kind of have this mental image of Moses getting to this point and going, do I have to put this? And the Lord said, yeah, come on. I told you, write it. Okay. But the Lord, hearing Miriam and Aaron speaking against their youngest brother, calls all 3 of them out to the tent of meeting. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. I don't know what they were thinking at this point, whether they were thinking that, their claims to importance were now going to be validated or what. But here's what the Lord says to them. Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. But not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him, and it depends on the translation you're looking at, it might say, I speak face to face. It's quite literally mouth to mouth, like if you're just like facing one another. Clearly and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. So much for, has he not spoken through us also? When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, like snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. So you kind of get this scene here where it's like, ah! And then he turns to Moses. And here we have again this, it sounds almost exactly like when Moses said, what have you done at the golden calf incident? Because he says, oh, my Lord. Well, this is a very different tune he's singing now. Do not punish us because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead whose flesh is half eaten away, comes out of his mother's womb. This indicates to me that Miriam was actually the driving force behind this protest, because she's the only one who actually receives the leprosy punishment. And of course, the Lord cries to the Lord, or Moses cries to the Lord, oh God, please heal her, please. And there's a sort of spirit in that request that suggests to me that he loved his siblings, that he was deeply concerned for them, and that he did not hold against them what they had just done to him. But the Lord said, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So basically, she is given leprosy, then healed, and then put in a 7-day quarantine, as was dictated in the law, to be declared clean. And from this point onward, you don't actually hear about Miriam until we get the account of her death in chapter 20. And that we only hear that the people, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. And it's also interesting to me that none of the 3 siblings were allowed to enter the promised land. And yet, they had been together through all of this. I mean, one of the most famous slave uprisings in history. The more famous because it wasn't the slaves who won their own freedom, but the power of the Lord channeled through Moses and Aaron, leading the people out. So I think I'm always going to think of this sibling group, Miriam, Aaron, and Moses, as first as an example of how the Lord supplies our needs through the people he places around us. You think about when Moses was born, what might have become of him if a little girl hadn't been lingering by the side of the river to see what happened to him. How when Moses was so deeply daunted by the prospect of going back and speaking to Pharaoh the words of the Lord, that God in his grace sent him his older brother. And in the words of the Lord, made Moses like God to Aaron, and Aaron his mouth, his prophet. But it also is an example to me of how even the greatest names and the closest families in the history of redemption can fail one another and fall short through, for example, lack of humility or lack of courage, jealousy of another's renown or position. Next week, we will be looking at someone who is not an Israelite. We're going to talk about Balaam. Son of Beor, who actually has 3 mentions in the New Testament, none of them positive, I'll just tell you that right up front, about how he was hired to curse the people of God. And how, failing that, because the Lord would not allow him, he had a plan B that worked much better. Or I should say worse. But anyway, that's next week. So if you would read Numbers 22 through, let me see, 25. That'll be your assignment for next week.